I've known you for, well, I think it was 30 years ago that I first interviewed you face-to-face when you, soon after you published maybe your first or second book, Software for the Brain. So a 30-year re-meeting, it's terrific. I love your work, and I love you, Michael, because of your humility, not fake humility. You are one of the most humble gurus. You'd hate me saying that, but thinking about thinking gurus that I know, and I've loved reading your books. I tell you why quickly, because you make the complicated seem so accessibly simple, and I love that about you, and that's why I was looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for the background. Very interesting.
Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that.
It's a pleasure. So here we are, the father, although you prefer to be the grandfather of lateral the times 10 thinking. Yes, that's right. But there was something that happened before. You mentioned Edward de Bono, and also there's another man that most on this podcast won't know of, but would know of his work in some way or another, and that's George Gallup. So it was with the combination of Edward de Bono, George Gallup, and Michael Hewitt-Gleeson that you became the world's first Ph.D. recipient in lateral thinking. Just talk us through that and how you got that, please.
Okay, well, thank you. Yes, George Gallup, Professor Gallup, he was 84 when I met him, so he was the founder of the Gallup poll at Princeton. Everyone would know about polling. He was also, in a sense, the inventor of market research, with the exotic idea was not just the company or the organization coming up with their product, like Henry Ford saying, here's the car and you can have any color you want as long as it's black, going forward. And still there are many companies, even today, still, and organizations that are driven by their own desires, which is good. But his exotic idea was to ask the customer for their point of view and to measure it scientifically, and through the sample and so on, that if you ask a sample of 1,200 people something, you get the same result as if you ask the whole population, plus or minus a small deviation. So that became the Gallup poll, market research, which in our polling is, no politician or marketer worth their salt would go into the market now without doing some kind of market research or polling and asking the constituency, the punters, what their point of view was. So he was a big guru in America when I met him, and he was a big fan of what we were doing with the School of Thinking. He felt that was the most important thing that America. He said in the Gallup poll they did every year to ask the American people what they felt about educational objectives. He said the number one thing that came out year after year was that they wanted their kids to be taught to think, but they didn't think much was being done about it. So I was very, very fortunate that he was a supporter. He became my examiner for my PhD, and I did my PhD in selling. By then, I'd been in America long enough to see what I thought when I went to America, and I was based in New York, it would be the land of the salesman. I would learn. I was already interested in selling, and not just doing it, but the theories of it and reading about it and so on. And a lot about it I didn't like. I didn't like, intuitively, and as an Australian, I didn't like it. It was too American and too sort of obvious. But anyway, I thought I'd learn more about it. When I got there, I found out that they weren't really that great at selling at all. They had a very big market, enormous compared to Australia. It was not as sophisticated a market as Australia. In Australia, the majority of people live in 2 or 3 cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. And we don't really have a middle Australia. So you've got, largely city folk constitute the market with their sophisticated tastes and their relative, cynicism. They tend to say no rather than yes. Where in America, New York, Chicago, LA are actually the minority in America, and the majority of the American market live in very small towns just spread out across that great vast country with relatively unsophisticated taste and rather more likely to say yes than no. Mm-hmm. So there I could see, you could go into the market with a product, not the greatest product in the world, capture a very small percentage of the market and be what we would call very successful. Whereas in Australia, it wouldn't work. You wouldn't survive. So anyway, these and other insights began to formulate in my brain as I'd been there long enough. So when I had the chance to do the Ph.D. in lateral thinking, I chose to challenge selling. So the idea of lateral thinking is to find out what the main point in something is and then escape from it in order to see if you can find another angle. So I did all my research on selling and found that all the books that were written since the early 1920s and then on through, this is around 1980 when I did this, Mike. I couldn't find any published work which was sort of academic or just very, very sort of promotional in that range, that didn't say that the fundamental truth about selling was the salesperson closes a sale. Mm. There were different styles, high pressure, low pressure, this method, that method. When the customer looks up there, you look up there, all special handshakes, dress for success, all the sort of voodoo and stuff to fill the pages. Yeah. But when you look at is the earth flat or is it round? Well, their view was what I consider the flat. It's the salesman that closes a sale, and this was proven, in the research many times, and I still do it when I'm working with a group. I ask them, when a salesperson goes out to make a sales call, or when they used to be able to go out to make a sales call before COVID, when they come back from that call, what's the first thing that their manager asks them?
Did you close the sale?
That's it. And every audience says the same thing. Did you close the sale? And that single question would drive the behavior of salespeople, because after all, the manager pays their salary. Mm. And while when they start off, they might be like that. But if every time you make a call, you come back, your boss asks the same question: did you get the deal? Did you close the salesman? I call this dishing your salespeople. Did you sell him? Did you sell her? Mm. Then after a while, they can be forgiven for getting the impression, oh, well, my job is to close them. And then that leads to all the kind of behavior that we've seen about in movies, in Death of a Salesman, Glengarry Glen Ross, and ultimately a couple of years ago in Australia with the Haynes Royal Commission, that as late as 2 or 3 years ago looked into the sales culture of the financial institutions, the banks, the insurance companies, financial planners, and so on. And the main finding that came out of the Haynes Royal Commission was that the sales culture was toxic and anti-customer.
Yeah.
So that's as late as, so it's sort of disappointing that after all these years, we still haven't changed things. But anyway, all that became of interest to me. Sorry, I'm raving on a bit. And having Edward de Bono, to help me understand the lateral thinking techniques for escaping from the main idea, and then George Gallup to, with his wisdom, to look at it. He said, then I did the PhD, the thesis, got the PhD, did a program in New York with 24 hospitals to prove it in the field, and got honors PhD and published. The book, became a bestseller, and George Gallup said it was the first new strategy for selling in 50 years in America. So this young Aussie St Kilda boy goes to America and teach the Yanks how to sell. So that was
good on you, mate, and good on you, buddy. Well, I can tell you and the audience, Michael, that that book that you wrote as a consequence of your thesis, PhD, your research, you titled it NewSell, relaunched it or republished it under a different title, Wombat Selling, and we'll come back to that if we can. But I read that book and I reread it and read it again after I reread it because I was absorbed in it and by it. And I put more than that, I put your principles, your theories, your proven research to work because I was a medical rep back at that time. Yeah. So I also gave the book to the trainer, the sales trainer of the company, big pharma company I was working for worldwide. He loved it. So I won national sales awards and kicked ass following implementing, because what you really found out through all of your research, and I'm going to paraphrase here, Michael, is that customers hate to be sold, but they do love to buy. And if you can facilitate the buying decision, not the selling.
Exactly.
But here's what we want to move on to if we can.
Yes.
You got your PhD under the umbrella of lateral thinking, but your work was in selling.
Yes.
And excuse me, with Edward de Bono, who has since passed, you co-founded the School of Thinking, which still runs today, and we'll also come back to that because you provide free thinking lessons online, and I can highly recommend them, and we'll talk more about that. Your book, Software for the Brain, I want to recommend that because that's the first book of yours I read, but it's not the first book you published, I believe, but I think it might have been the second or third. I've read every other book that you've published since then. Now, here's what we want to come to now, Michael. Times 10 thinking. Now, many Americans, when they think of times 10 or 10 times thinking or 10x, will think of his name escapes me, a Texan entrepreneur and millionaire and trainer, and he actually has a book on closing the sale. It'll come to me. North Americans will know who I'm talking about. But you actually wrote a book on times 10 thinking called the Memeplex back in the day. So what's the benefit? Now, what's that?
That was 2000. I published the X10 Memeplex.
Over 20 years ago. So, I want to arc back to something you said earlier when you were covering your early story. I've been dying to ask you this question, Michael. You mentioned about your training in the Army, the Defence Forces, Vietnam, getting prepared for Vietnam, and how being trained in leadership by the Australian Defence Forces, the Australian Army, prepared you for being a leader of young men in war and battle and what happens. But you learned something else. You learnt, and you write this as an acronym, and I want to ask you about this. The power of practice, repetition, and rehearsal.
Yes.
Just talk us through briefly about that power of practice, repetition, and rehearsal, and why do you use acronyms so often in all of your work?
Okay, good questions. Thank you. So I'll answer the second question first, because a lot of people ask that. So the one you mentioned we call PRR, practice, repetition, rehearsal, and there are others, the GBB, and we've got quite a lot of them. And after we teach them to people, they like them, they learn them, but they joke about them and say the very same thing you asked. Well, if you got another 3-letter acronym for us, I guess I really learned that in the military first. The military are very big on that sort of thing. And there's a very interesting cognitive reason for it. And then it comes back then to the philosophy of the School of Thinking. A lot of people, when they think or hear about thinking, they imagine, the famous Rodin's famous statue of the thinker, his chin on his hand, and you can imagine the bearded philosophers, Aristotle and Socrates and others through the ages, sitting around sort of chatting and meditating and so on. And that is a lot of fun. I mean, particularly over a bottle of red wine. I mean, we all enjoy that. But we didn't, that's not what we were interested in. We were interested in the kind of thinking that gets things done. The kind of thinking, I mean, one of the things I like about the theme you've chosen for your podcast is comeback. Now, what a terrific idea. We all have our ups and downs in life. So it's just part of being alive. How do you come back? How do you recover? And we've got a big recovery project ahead of us on the planet now, not only with climate change and other things, but of course with COVID. But how do you recover? And how do you come back? Or whether it's just on a personal, intimate scale, if you have a health challenge or a relationship a breakup, whatever, the things that happen in life.
Yeah.
How do you come back? And so I commend you for, really focusing in on that and offering some help there.
Thank you.
But where is that done? Where is the comeback part of the body? And if you put your hand on your forehead there, just below your hand is what we call the prefrontal cortex. I've just recently written a small book about it called The Fourth Brain. And because I was attending a conference about, an online conference in my field, cognitive neuroscience, say 3, maybe 4 years ago. And there's one of the speakers I really wanted to listen to. So I stayed in there so I could hear him. He was a leading cognitive neuroscientist. And he said 90% of the papers on the human brain have been written in the last 10 years. There's been an enormous explosion in the interest in the brain, how it works, alongside, artificial intelligence and computers and programming. And all of this incredible growth of artificial thinking has kicked back a tremendous interest in what our brain does. And so I thought, gee, I did all my work in the 70s and 80s. Maybe I don't know anything anymore. So I spent 18 months making sure I really caught up with, all the stuff that was going on that I might have missed out of. And most of it's still quite valid. But the main leap forward is the work that's been done on the prefrontal cortex. This is the executive part of the brain.
Right.
So the other 3 parts of the brain come to us in a way genetically pre-wired. The reptile brain, from a million generations ago, regulates our heart and all of our housekeeping and keeps us alive. Then you've got the mammal brain, which is the emotional brain, the limbic system, our emotions, the big one, fear, and then the big human cortex. But they're all actually come as a result of our DNA. They're programmed, and as you grow, these things grow. But there's this front part of the brain which doesn't come genetically. It has to be wired up from birth. So it gets wired up and developed, not genetically, but through all the hundreds and probably thousands of daily, hits and misses, ups and downs, wins and losses, all the experiences we have. And this is how we can learn to live in the street where we live, in the family we live, in the culture we live in, the environment, the climate, and so on. Otherwise, we wouldn't necessarily be able to adapt. And so it doesn't really come online fully until we're about 25. So this accounts for a lot of the problems that adolescents have in peer group pressure and in gambling and, all sorts of other things, because they don't really have the ability to assess risk and to do this sort of.
I can relate, Michael, in a big way.
Well, I think we all can, we've been teenagers, and some of us have even have teenagers as kids, and so that's a big issue. But all of this is quite recent, and so I wrote about that recently. I'll send you a copy of this particular book anyway. But the point is, what I was interested in then before, and even more so now, is developing software for the prefrontal cortex. Software specifically so that you can come back, or you can recover, or you can look at things differently, or you can escape from your box, whatever your box might be.
Yes.
And that is, in a sense, the most difficult feat of human thinking, is to escape from our point of view. Because after all, that is our point of view, if you add culturally in the Western world, if you were educated in America or Europe or Australia, you learnt at school, the church in the Middle Ages invented the idea of, universal education, which was a terrific concept, and to the world, it spread it around through the world by influencers, we would call today, but they were missionaries then. And they went around the world and they established schools and libraries and hospitals and so on. And we have this vast educational project, which we've seen over the last 500 years. But the software for the brain that was embedded in that was Greco-Roman software, Aristotle software, the idea of right and wrong. So in the thinking hats, it's the black hat, the judgment hat. I'm right, and if there's such a thing as right and wrong, well, I'm right, so therefore you're wrong. And that leads to conflict and argument, and We see in our parliament in Australia all the people on this side saying we're right and nothing you say makes any sense. And these are adults. And on the other side of the parliament, they say, no, we're right. And so you get this constant clash of right, wrong, trying to cancel each other out and one-upmanship. And out of that is supposed to emerge a positive and a safe and a productive future. So it's not a bad software for mail sorting and label slapping. But for designing a better future, it just can't get the job done. So we need more software for our brain, particularly software for our PFC, our prefrontal cortex, to enable us to escape from our point of view so we can find a much better one. And in our algorithm, we use 10 times better as the provocation. So that's where the X10 or the times 10 comes into it. So we end up with a little formula, the brain secreting at any moment a current view of the situation. So right now, you and me and anyone watching, their brain is giving them a CVS, a current view of the situation based on their mood and their background and their wiring and the stimulus they're getting from this podcast. So you have a CVS. Now, that's fine. That's great. We need a current view in order to know, just to be able to live. But then you have two strategies available to you. You can either keep your CVS, your current view of the situation, maintain it, defend it, because after all, it's right, or you can escape from it and find a better view, a 10 times better view of the situation, which is rather more difficult because it's easier to defend what you've got.
Yes.
Than to escape from it, leave it behind with all the risk and uncertainty that involves in order to find a better one. But when we're trying to come back from a very bad CVS that we have, depending on just what happened to us in life, then escaping from our CVS to find a BVS is a very important thing. And that's why, I think what you're doing is great. And the software we have been developing and using, and it works very well around the world, is amongst other things, designed to do that. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. It makes more sense to me because I know, excuse me, Michael, and audience watching and listening, I've got to take a drink. I do apologise. Michael, it does make perfect sense to me. However, you're preaching to the converted with me. So when we think of a software and an app, because you also use the vernacular an app for your brain. Yeah. So we don't have any USB that we're going to stick into our ear to upload this software, this app, this new way of operating system or a section of the operating system. And you've developed this, and I'm going to put a link in the show notes, Michael, because you've got a 59-second lesson in this. Exactly. And it's just such a succinct video. I've watched it, 20, 30 times, more probably. And I highly recommend the audience to drop down into the show notes and click on the link towards that takes you to Dr. Michael Hewitt-Gleeson's 59-second lesson in thinking, because there is where you're going to learn in 59 seconds how to upload, install, and turn on and switch on this app, this new piece of software for your brain, which when you use it twice, you'll have it forever, as Michael says. And the other thing that I want to come to now, Michael, because we can this is kind of like we're going to get into the shell here. We're going to get to the seed of the apple. All right. So let's just say we've got someone listening, viewing you, Michael, listening to you, and they do feel right now stuck. And let's face it. Hey, let me tell you, only a few weeks ago, I dipped into that kind of thinking. I really did. I got sucked into the bullshit that is in media at the moment and all around us at different levels to do with what's going on. And I found myself, my thinking, going quite negative, and I had to pull myself out of it. And I did. This is what actually inspired me to reach out to you again, because I reused the CVS to BVS app software, and it's pulled me. It works. It has pulled me back out of the mire. It really has pulled me out of the mire. And so, Michael, there's something that right now I think would be a good time to also where does our audience go to get access to your teachings, your information, your books? Where would you like them to go online?
Well, fine. The school is the best place to visit, the School of Thinking, and you could just do School of Thinking, or the actual URL is schoolofthinking.org. So schoolofthinking.org, and that takes you to the school, and very you can wander around and have a look around and explore it for yourself through the various links. But and there's a couple of videos up front which explain very succinctly what the problem is and what the solution that the school offers is. And then if you wish, you can sign up for. Of course, it's all free, and there are no fees of any kind. So it's not just a come. No, there's nothing against fees, but as it happens, the School of Thinking, it's funded. We've funded it through our corporate work that we do. We charge corporations handsomely because they have the money, and we provide it to the public for free. And then the basic course is a 2-week course, 10 lessons. You get by email, you register with your name and email, and you get a lesson every day with one question in each lesson, and then you can think about that. And also you can see the answers of other people who are taking the course and receive, in a sense, instruction from the other students as well.
I'm in the middle of that, and I can highly recommend, personally recommend that you do it. I'm speaking to the audience now, Michael, that you do it. Go to this link will also be in the show notes, but it's schoolofthinking.org. There's no hyphens, just schoolofthinking.org, and there you'll see. Now, Michael, you also came up with the idea of these smart. Do you call them smart books?
Yeah, I call them fast books now.
Fast books, yes.
Because, we live in a world, that's dictated by our smartphones, and basically, if I write a book now, it's published, it goes up on the shelf, but everyone's attention is on their screen. So you've got to be where the fish are. So if people's attention, which is our most valuable possession, our attention, if that's on the screen, then I better have my books there. What kind of book do you need on a screen? You need a book you can read in about 10 minutes. You need not too many words on a page and bigger print and so on. So I designed the books to be easily read quickly on your smartphone, and I call them fast books. And there's a bunch of those, and you can load them on the school. I just wanted to finish just something I got off the track before. You asked me about why we use the 3-letter acronyms, yes. And the reason is I learned that in the military. So when you learn skills and you practice and you drill and you do quite a lot, maybe many hours of practice in order to be good at it, but usually these skills are required under highly emotional and difficult circumstances, such as in battle. And you don't have a lot of time for long conversations about, I think we should. So if you're in a plane that gets shot, and there's two of you, and the front pilot will say, the call's on Tango Whiskey Juliet, eject, eject, eject. Now, you can't say, are you sure? Or what do I do now? Because it's too late. He will go, and the explosion from his seat will kill you. So you've got to go first quickly so that he can go. So there's no time really to stop and think. All this thinking and that had been done previously with the planning and the drilling. So these eject, 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 or ambush left, or whatever are things, or eyes right, on the parade ground. These are all succinct commands that can trigger off a lot of work that's been done in the background. So if you want groups to act as a team. Now, I'm not saying all of us have to do that, but that's where it came from under the situations with the most severe bottom line. So they really have to work, and the military are way ahead in their training and so on of understanding human behavior, how to train human behavior, how to change it, way ahead. And I realize now, as I got more of a few years under my belt, the 3 trainings that I had been exposed to with the academy, through the education system, the church, and the military. And by far and away, the military was way, way ahead of the others. And my explanation would be that in a Darwinian sense, the bottom line for, and business too, also the boardroom. So you've got the academy, the boardroom, the church, and the military. The bottom line of the military is far more severe than any of the other bottom lines. So in a Darwinian sense, it's no surprise really since the Roman army, over thousands of years of military science, they have evolved highly effective, methods for training. And one of them is to use those very succinct trigger patterns that trigger off a larger pattern that's been developed. So in our software, CVS to BVS, once you understand that it means the current view of the situation, CVS, can never be equal to the better view of the situation, BVS. And to give it some measurement, because there's two sides of the brain, one, in general terms, one likes words, but the other likes numbers. So we can say lateral thinking, or we can replace that with X10 or times 10 thinking. Right. Same kind of, you're provoked to escape from where you are and to go somewhere. The X10 will do that for you, multiply you by 10 away from where you are, and create the escape from the box effect or the lateral effect. So we ended up with the formula CVS, current view of the situation, which your brain gives you at any moment, multiplied by 10 equals BVS, better view of the situation. And then you can just practice that CVS to BVS like you were doing push-ups. So when you're walking down the street, I was in New York, your left foot hits the ground, I'd say CVS to BVS, not out loud because they might lock you up. But it all works from a cognitive point of view so that you can really develop habits of thinking.
I took you literally when you wrote that in your book, that's how you helped to install by repetition CVS to BVS. And I started doing it again just a few weeks ago. And there it was, because the software was there. It just needed to be reignited, turned back on again. And when I say it works, I mean, when I say to the audience, Michael, Dr. Michael Hewitt-Gleeson's software for the brain and this particular switch, CVS, current view of the situation, to BVS, better view of the situation, it works. And so also I want to mention when the audience go to your site, schoolofthinking.org, I do want to recommend that they scroll down the page and do this. Pick one of those books that you see that Michael has there free. They're a quick read. They're quick to download. They're quick to read. The way that Michael has formatted them is that it's almost like you might know of Amazon have a speed reading app called Word Runner, where you can by choice flick a switch, and the whole book that you have appears on your screen one word at a time at a speed up to 900 words per minute if you want. I mean, I choose around 250, 350 words per minute, and so it's a fast way of reading a book. But Dr. Michael Hewitt-Gleeson, it doesn't have that, but he's centered in big, large capital font in the center of and probably 20 up to 10, 20 words per page. You can read his books in 5 to 10 minutes and you'll get 5 to 10, 20, 30 plus, 40 plus years of wisdom packed into 5 to 10 minutes of reading. So I recommend that you go there. Michael, time always flies when you're having fun. And I could do this, for another hour or two with you, because there's so much to talk about: your books, your theories, your the apps that you've created, the people you've worked with. Jack Welch, former head of GE, just for an example, which we didn't get to talk about, but the audience will find out all about this on your more about this on your site there, schoolofthinking.org. But there's something I'd like to ask you to close off with, if we can, because it is something that caught my eye and may catch the audience's eye too when they go to your site there at schoolofthinking.org. And I'll quote you: human intelligence is now being seriously threatened by artificial intelligence. We may need the idea of thinking instructors more and more than ever before. Can we close off with your explanation of what you mean there?
Okay, so it can be threatened by AI. Yes, it can also be helped by AI. But I'll just talk in the context that I wrote that was in the. I'm trying to encourage people to develop their human thinking skills. I would say by the end of this decade, we're already well and truly on the way, and no one can actually predict the future. But I would say it'll be quite clear by the end of this decade that there are two types of information models. There's the carbon model, which is us, and the silicon model, which is computers. We're already there. I mean, most of the advanced weapons systems of the world are all run by computers because human reactions aren't fast enough. Even though they may still have a pilot in a fast jet, most of it's all being done by computers. And there are many other situations, even the laboratories that are making vaccines and so on that we need so desperately for COVID. Most of the work is done by supercomputers, not without human assistance. So you have these two quite distinct, in many ways complementary, the carbon information processing, which is from humans, and silicon. But there are speculations by people, by all various people, as can happen, as to what extent there could be a threat. And the threat doesn't have to be intentional or personified in the sense that artificial intelligence, for some philosophical reason doesn't like humans and decides that we're the enemy. It doesn't have to be. It can be just an incidental threat that was never intended, just an unintended consequence. So, but certainly artificial intelligence cannot unhappen. It cannot go away. These cannot go away. There's no one going to come up. There's all sorts of people saying, what are the negative consequences of Facebook and too much attention on screens and blah, blah, blah. Well, there's a mixture of both. There are negative consequences and they're very positive, useful things. I don't think I could really do without this anymore, but it's irrelevant because it ain't going to go away. No one's going to be able to rise up and get rid of these. So we are evolving into the future together with AI. Now, in the military, hope is not a strategy. We can hope that there will never be a threat and that everything is fine, but that's not a strategy. We should plan for the ability to manage any potential threat. And the best way to do that is to increase the level and the excellence of human thinking. That can easily be done because we've got the hardware, which is by far and away superior to any silicon computer on the planet or in the universe that we know of. The human brain is by far the most complex and amazing machine, but we're still largely teaching 2,500-year-old brain software in schools, a Greco-Roman right-wrong system. Get the right answer and don't make any mistakes. Not bad, but by itself, nowhere near enough. So in order to offer a solution to what I be the biggest problem in the world, which is human thinking. The solution is to improve human thinking, and we can have developed and can use and have used software for, in today's metaphor, software for the brain.
Yeah,
it's there. It can be taught. We understand enough about the brain to know what it's good at and what it's not good at, and so we can design compensatory software like CBS to BBS and other things, and they can be taught even in 59 seconds. So that's the attention that I want to draw to the idea of improving our thinking skills.
Wonderful, Michael. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Michael Hewitt-Gleeson, the world's first holder of a Ph.D. in lateral thinking, and a brainy guy who uses his brain to think about thinking, but comes across as the bloke next door. That's why I love Michael. So thanks again, Michael, for being on the show. And to you, the audience, please do this. Now, I'm going to give you an instruction here. Do what I say. Do what I suggest. Go to the show notes and click on the link to take you to Michael's site and get one of those books. check it out and sign up for the free mini course in thinking about thinking and get that software for the brain loaded in and get it, because it could take you 20, you'll read Michael say, it could take you 20 years or more to get started. But once you're started, you're off and running and off to the races.